Watch right now on the Front News project. The legendary Azov returns to Mariupol. Exclusive footage. The enemy is in for a very rough time. Putin is in a panic, afraid of Robert Brovdi, known as Madyar. Ukrainian drones have turned Moscow into a frontline city. And yet another disgrace for Kadyrov's men. We will show you the leaky one. The air defense of the TikTok troops. Fiery, hot, and blazing. Watch frontline combat footage right here, right now. Greetings, this is Vladimir Timoshenko with you, and we're starting right away with the main topic. The parade is over, but fear mixed with shame remains. The Russians promised retaliatory strikes, but in the end, they swallowed the destruction of their factories. Ukraine and Russia agreed to a temporary ceasefire on President Zelensky's terms. But even after it ends, the Kremlin won't have time to protect its... They are targeting key strategic facilities. Primarily because the Ukrainian military has officially announced the start of a major Burlak operation. Currently, Ukraine
is preparing to strike Russian targets left without air defense by Putin for the sake of protecting the parade. This is exactly what the commander of the drone forces, Robert Brovdi, stated in a comment to a Guardian journalist.
A symbolic attack on Red Square would make headlines around the world, but he says that Ukraine will likely deliver a blow where Russian air defenses are weaker. Why waste drones on the Great Wall? He said, referring to the increased security around Moscow. If you strike at the energy sector or the military, the best blow will be on the periphery.
Just days before the parade, Ukrainian drones struck precisely those regions of Russia, very accurately and deliberately. This demonstrated just how porous the air defenses remain in the regions. Putin doesn't care about protecting people or factories. For him, the main thing is to show the whole world his so-called might in the form of a parade.
Yes, indeed, for the sake of protecting Moscow and the Moscow region, just to hold the parade. The Putin regime has practically stripped the main European regions, the European part of the Russian Federation of defenses. It is precisely in these regions, by the way, that the parade has been cancelled. That is, we've heard that in a whole number of Russian regions, parade marches on May 9th are being cancelled. This is directly related to the fact that the air defense forces concentrated in these regions won't even be able to fully guarantee minimal protection for holding these parades and other events, since the majority of all air defense assets have been pulled to Moscow. Moreover, it won't be possible to quickly return these systems to their original locations, deploy them in their designated areas, and bring them to combat readiness.
What's more, the Russians are short on air defense not just because of the parade. The Ukrainian campaign to destroy Russian air defense systems and strike deep into its rear has literally created a shortage of traditional defense assets. Let us recall that in April alone, Ukrainian drones destroyed 38 air defense units as well as key radar stations. Ukrainian drones are hitting the Kremlin's image of great power so hard that even Putin himself has started begging for a temporary truce just to be able to hold his victory parade show on Red Square in peace. Even after the strikes on the air traffic control center in the Rostov area and the resulting transportation collapse at airports in the south of the country, Putin responded like this.
The Kiev regime has perpetrated another heinous act that is, without any shadow of a doubt, of a terrorist nature. Namely, it directly impacted and struck the Rostov Regional Air Traffic Control Center. This, beyond any shadow of a doubt, could have seriously compromised and affected the safety of civilian aircraft. Fortunately, no tragic incidents or catastrophic events occurred.
But it's nothing serious. The main thing is it wasn't on Red Square. Earlier, the Kremlin threatened to strike Kiev with a nutcracker if there was an attack on Moscow. But, as Viktor Sobolev, a member of the State Duma Defense Committee, stated, Russia will not bomb Kyiv over the aviation collapse. Russia will only strike if their sacred parade is disrupted. Once again, not because of attacks on factories, key centers, or oil, but only because of strikes on the parade. Yes, because Putin doesn't care about anything else.
For Putin, of course, holding the parade is the top priority, no matter how feeble and depressing it may look by 2026. And not demonstrate Russia's weakness and frailty, but still, for Putin, the most important thing is holding the parade in Moscow.
Russia is asking for a pause to celebrate victory. So Russia hasn't even gotten up off its knees yet. Putin agreed with Zelensky on a ceasefire from May 9th to 11th exclusively so he could show off on Red Square while telling stories about the great victory. That
Our cause is just, we are together. Victory has always been and will always be ours. Glory to the victorious people. Glory to the veterans. Glory to the armed forces of Russia. Happy holiday to you. Happy Victory Day. Hurrah!
Zelensky allowed the parade in order to create silence on the front and carry out a prisoner exchange. After all, people are more important. That's the difference.
This is an absolute disgrace and humiliation for the Putin regime. The entire Russian official circle, the whole political elite, and the propaganda pool. They were literally beside themselves in hysteria over the threat of a strike on Red Square. And they threatened a nuclear strike, a strike on Kyiv directly on the government quarter, threatened the embassies located in that area, and even appealed to Trump, asking him to mediate on the issue of holding the parade. In other words, there has never been such hysteria about. There were no threats to the May 9th parade from the Russian side, and now it depended solely on Zelensky whether this parade would take place or not. You could say, in a classic sense, thank you. For Russians, thanks to Grandpa for the victory can now be interpreted as thanks to Zelensky for the parade.
But now, for the Kremlin, eliminating Zelensky is no longer the only goal. After all, Russia itself is being shattered and scorched. It is specifically the drones, which most often come from the unmanned systems service led by the aforementioned Mazyar. He himself became a target for the Russian special services and a real source of fear for Putin. The devastating strikes by his brigade have become a serious challenge for Russia.
Such decisions are not made by Putin, but by completely different teams, by someone else entirely. The command in Russia. It is precisely for this reason that Manner himself has become an incredibly serious and persistent problem for the Russian occupiers currently stationed there. It was his unit that became, first and foremost, one of the most effective on the battlefield. And then he carried out a major reform in the unmanned systems forces. And now we are seeing the results of that. Therefore, of course, it cannot be ruled out that not only he, but also other outstanding Ukrainian commanders and officers are on the blacklist, but he is undoubtedly among the very first on that list.
Putin agreed to reconciliation, agreed to Zelensky's terms, and agreed to talk with the Europeans about ending the war. The parade was not affected, but Russia's economy is dying because of retaliatory Ukrainian attacks on Russian industry. And all Russians have already realized this. Ukrainian sanctions are clearly working better than the European ones.
And by the way, about the temporary ceasefire, Russia is predictably violating it. So, since the beginning of the day on May 11th, the Russian aggressor has attacked the positions of Ukrainian defenders 38 times along the entire front line. Here are the details. In the territory of the Zaporizhzhia region, the main enemy activity was concentrated in the Mariupol direction. There, the defense forces successfully stopped 5 assault attempts by the occupiers near Dobropilya, Starokranka, and Zhelezno-Dorozhny. In the Orikhiv direction, the Russian army tried to attack twice in the area of Stepnohirsk, but was unsuccessful. And now, another extremely important topic. A legendary unit. Azov has announced that it is returning to Mariupol. For the first time since the start of the full-scale war, the legendary Azov is capturing its hometown on camera and striking targets belonging to the occupiers. Now for the details. Let's watch.
Azov is returning to Mariupol, but for now only in the form of reconnaissance and strike drones. But the main thing is something else. Ukrainian drones are already entering places where the occupiers once felt safe.
Besides its military significance, this also has political importance. In other words, we are making it clear that Mariupol is not Russian territory enshrined in the constitution of the occupying country, but a temporarily occupied Ukrainian city. And accordingly, Ukraine is considering the possibility of reclaiming the occupied territories, primarily by military means.
So what does this mean? Does this mean that Russia can no longer maintain its own security, even deep in the rear?
Moreover, the shortage of air defense systems is not only or even primarily a problem of the Russian military-industrial complex, but rather the fears of the Russian dictator, which the Ukrainian intelligence community skillfully exploits. At the moment, almost all air defense systems have been redeployed to Moscow and the Moscow region, and moreover, as I understand it, not on a temporary but on a permanent basis.
Azov states that their pilots patrol roads up to 160 kilometers deep from the front line. In their sights are Mariupol, Donetsk, and the logistics of the Russian army.
This is what puts the Russian army's capabilities on pause. The redeployment of operational reserves for the further active phase of the offensive against the positions of Ukraine's defense forces. Control over rear logistics nullifies the capabilities of the regular units of the Russian army. At the moment of personnel rotation, delivery of ammunition, delivery of fuel and lubricants, and accordingly, evacuation of the wounded.
Mariupol is not just an occupied city for Russia, it is a key hub. That is why any Ukrainian strikes and control over this direction are extremely painful for Moscow.
Accordingly, all logistics for the Russian occupation forces, when redeploying operational reserves, go precisely through this port city. In other words, this allows the Russians to quickly transfer both armored vehicles and, accordingly, personnel, fuel, and lubricants and ammunition.
Earlier, Ukrainian drones had already attacked energy facilities and the military infrastructure of the occupiers in Mariupol. Substations, warehouses, and Russian logistics points came under attack.
There is the first one.
And it's not just about this occupied city anymore. The Russians also considered Donetsk to be a deep rear area.
Dimitar, right? Let's go, Dimitar.
Start filming. Earlier, Azov stated that Ukrainian drones had effectively taken control of Russian logistics routes around occupied Donetsk.
Demonstration flights of Ukrainian UAVs even over the center of Donetsk, and accordingly, strikes on Mariupol outside the range of the Russian air defense system. In other words, they are making it clear that now the logistics, the occupiers' rear is under fire control for several hundred kilometers deep into the territory.
But the depth of the strikes will only increase. And this already changes the very logic of the war. If earlier Russia calmly used the occupied cities as a safe military hub, now any convoy, warehouse, or equipment can be destroyed literally on the move.
This is the tactic of rusting leaps. That is, accordingly, it means a phased approach to preparing offensive operations. First, the occupiers' logistics are brought under fire control, then accordingly, strikes are carried out on command and control points and temporary personnel deployment sites, and only after that are counter-offensive operations conducted directly.
Azov has already returned to Mariupol. For now, it's through the eyes of drones and strikes on Russian logistics. But for the Kremlin, the problem lies elsewhere. The front line is gradually fading, and cities that Moscow considered to be deep in the rear are increasingly turning into territories where Russia no longer feels in control.
And there's another thing. Putin is terrified of the Ukrainian Magyar, and with good reason. Under the leadership of Robert Brovdy, the unmanned systems forces of the armed forces of Ukraine are now terrorizing even the most remote regions of the aggressor country on a daily basis, making them finally feel what war is really like. And Moscow has already come to terms with its new status as a frontline city. And this is just the beginning. There's more to come. Now let's tell you more in detail.
Magyar's sanctions have turned out to be far more effective than those of the West. In recent months, there has hardly been a day in Russia without loud fireworks. Ukraine's unmanned systems forces have become the occupiers' greatest fear, and Robert Magyar Brovdy himself has become Putin's personal enemy. The commander of the unmanned systems forces has become target number 2 for Russia, second only to Zelensky. To be fair, it is well deserved.
It was exactly this kind of blow that was dealt to Russia in 1917, when the country was fighting in World War I. But victory was stolen from them.
The Russian dictator's fear of Magyar's drones during the parade was so great that he literally had to beg for a truce and even pull almost all available air defense systems to Moscow.
Putin pulled all possible air defense systems to Moscow. In other words, he simply took them away from other critically important sites. Basically, they decided to cover one Botoxed ass at the expense of dozens of oil refineries and military factories.
The result was predictable and explosive.
All of this smoke, just so you know, that's not clouds. Over there, something blew up, wings behind the building. Oh, there was another one.
However, it seems the Kremlin still has no intention of returning air defense systems to the regions. The day before, it was reported that there were more than 100 air defense systems around the Russian capital. Their number kept growing. According to Radio Liberty journalists, another ring of air defense positions is gradually being built around Moscow, primarily from Panzer anti-aircraft missile systems mounted on towers. But then again, who said this will help?
That is absolutely unbelievable. Unbelievable.
As for the ceasefire that the Russian dictator begged for, it's just a breather for Russia. And Magyar is openly announcing further sanctions deep behind the lines.
The celebration of the Free Ukrainian Bird Parade started early. The worms, the military-industrial complex, and the fuel and energy sector felt it quite clearly and in a fundamentally new rhythm and geography. Siberia may be beyond the mountains, but it's really not that far away. To be continued, 72 hours is not an eternity.
In addition to the announced explosions, Magyar generously warned the occupiers that it's not worth trying to march on Kyiv. A new attempt by the Kremlin to seize the Ukrainian capital could turn into the greatest bloodshed in world history.
A blitzkrieg is now impossible. If Russia had 1 million tanks and it tried to seize Kyiv again, it would be the biggest bloodbath in world history. 2 million drones would swoop down on those tanks and mercilessly burn them.
By the way, once again, the notorious Kadyrovites have distinguished themselves. Here is footage from Chechnya. In quotes, the brilliant work of the local leaky air defense during the previous Ukrainian armed forces attack on military targets in Grozny. No, really, there are definitely no analogs here. Yeah, the Kadyrovite TikTokers in all their glory. And here, what's telling? The Economist reports that for the first time in almost 3 years, the initiative in the war is shifting to Ukraine. Ukraine is gradually changing the course of this war and inflicting increasingly tangible damage on Russia. Want details? Here they are. The Russian offensive has stalled. The pace of the occupiers' advance. This spring, it dropped to its lowest level since 2023, according to analysts from the New York Times.
They can no longer launch offensives on the same scale as before, but results are still expected regularly.
The result is these kinds of reckless actions by the Russian command. In the settlement of Rodninska, the Russian General Staff concentrated a large assault unit which was supposed to deliver that very result. But the result? It was the Ukrainian armed forces who showed the result, leveling the buildings and the fighters with aerial bombs.
Naturally, nothing was left of the enemy. The entire detachment, which was likely up to several dozen people, was buried under the rubble. And this was made possible precisely thanks to the additional power. So what kind of bombs are these? Definitely not 125, as I said, but possibly at least 250 kilograms or even more. Maybe even half a ton.
On one of the main directions towards Sloviansk, Putin's troops also distinguished themselves. Yes, they went on the assault on motorcycles, hoping to slip through the kill zone.
Gathering a column of 16 motorcycles, Putin's troops moved forward to quickly cross the gray zone and launch an assault. But the drones of the 81st Airmobile Brigade were ready for the attack. Moreover, adjacent units immediately assisted them. This is the advantage of drone-based defense. You can provide support from afar, there's no need to transport infantry or expose certain positions on the front line. As a result, according to the brigade commander's report, all the motorcycles were destroyed and the soldiers were killed.
At the same time, even a distance of 150 kilometers is no longer safe for the occupiers. The rear. As analysts report, the Ukrainian armed forces are now focused on destroying Russian reserves and stockpiles at depths of up to 150 kilometers, which significantly reduces their potential. Of the forward units.
All these attacks on logistics have bled the Russian army dry and continue to destroy it. Its strength right in the rear. This is one of the main, if not the very main, reasons for the failure of Putin's troops' offensive in 2026. By the way,
for many, the final straw was Putin's parade on May 9th, when not a single piece of equipment appeared on Red Square. And all the achievements of the Russian military-industrial complex could only be shown in a video clip. The question of the greatness of the world's second army resolved itself.
Putin said that right now the equipment is very much needed at the front in order to finish the so-called special military operation as soon as possible. That is, even an uninformed viewer of this event gets the impression that there is so little equipment and it is so needed and important that even just a few dozen units or even fewer can't be spared. They can't even send a few units to Red Square.
At the same time, a crucial role in the near-total halt of the Russian offensive was played by a new approach from the Ukrainian command. The new core system of the Ukrainian armed forces proposed by Minister Fedorov, as well as the long-range sanctions introduced by the head of the unmanned systems forces. Madyar's units have shown phenomenal results both on the battlefield and behind Russian lines.
the SBS continue their fundamental struggle against Russian air defense. Why fundamental? Because destroying air defense systems in the frontline zone then allows for relatively free attacks on logistics and various important targets, such as warehouses, headquarters, and military bases.
It seems that even in the Kremlin, it has become clear that by the 5th year of the war, the Russian Federation is only losing momentum. Moscow doesn't know how to solve this problem, because even Putin, respectfully referring to Zelensky as Mr., is already cautiously talking about a truce.
It is quite possible that this decline is being acknowledged in Russia because the Institute for the Study of War has repeatedly noted that Russian units unable to capture even a small Ukrainian village, so we're talking about villages here, not cities, have started publishing AI-generated videos, with the Russian side releasing artificially generated videos supposedly showing that Ukrainian soldiers are allegedly surrendering en masse, and similarly videos are being released supposedly showing the Russian flag being raised, here and there, in various places, even though in reality it isn't there at all.
At the same time, Moscow continues to publicly insist on the withdrawal of defense forces from the territory of Donbas. By the way, according to Western experts' estimates, if Russia continues its offensive at the current pace, it would take them 30 years to capture the entire Donetsk region.
And here's more bad news personally for Putin and his entire inner circle. Ukraine is creating an unprecedentedly effective air defense system. Now our skies are protected by a real fortress aircraft equipped with state-of-the-art anti-drone technologies. All the details are in our next report.
Old threats but new solutions. Ukraine continues to search for additional resources to destroy Shaheds. And it must be said, not without success.
This American machine gun is mounted on the side of the fuselage. It is capable of firing up to 3,000 rounds per minute, and it takes down drones one after another.
Western journalists were shown a truly unique team dedicated to eliminating enemy drones. A group of enthusiasts converted a Soviet An-28, which was used for parachuting before the war, but today it stands guard over the Ukrainian sky. The director of the parachute school says that in the first days of the full-scale invasion, he lost his son, but he himself could not join the military because of his age. He decided not to sit idle, not to just sit around.
He went to the main headquarters of the Air Force. They told me, yes, you're already old, and I told them, if you won't take me into the army, then I'll create my own army.
Now the crew is in fact fully integrated into the Ukrainian Air Force. It is from them that the volunteers receive coordinates and flight assignments. Since the middle of last year, they have been taking shifts on duty around the clock next to their plane. And as the markings on the fuselage show, during this time, they have already destroyed more than 200 enemy drones. However, our air defense is being strengthened not only thanks to volunteers, but also through fundamentally new solutions, such as, for example, laser weapons, which have already been supplied to certain air defense groups. At the same time, we are not talking about weapons provided by Western partners, but about a domestic development by the Ukrainian defense industry, under the name Trident, which, by the way, surpasses both British and Israeli models of similar weaponry in its specifications.
The advanced Ukrainian combat laser system is now capable of effectively shooting down various aerodynamic targets at altitudes of well over 2 kilometers in the sky. These are serious tactical and technical characteristics. The fact is, its American, let's say, counterpart, the effective range is about 1.6 kilometers. Accordingly, when the Ukrainian side announces tactical and technical characteristics, specifically a target engagement range of 2 kilometers, we can say that this is a significant breakthrough for the Ukrainian defense industry in the development of innovative strike systems.
So, the publication Militarny writes that the system is currently undergoing final tests before its official premiere. That's why it is being tested in combat and the development is showing impressive results. The system easily handles reconnaissance devices at a distance of about 1.5 kilometers. For the popular FPV drones on the front lines, the effective engagement zone is about 800 to 900 meters. The developers report that this is not the limit. As experts explain, the main factor determining the range and power of laser weapons is their power source. So the potential for modernization is practically unlimited.
Apparently, the laser's power is over 50 kilowatts. Because, let me emphasize again, with the declared effective range, the American laser has a range of about 1.6 kilometers and a power of around 50 kilowatts. In addition, it should be noted that a similar combat laser has also been developed by the British side. The British combat laser has a comparable operational range, extending to a distance of 2 kilometers. However, the output power of this system is already measured at 55 kilowatts.
If Ukrainian developers manage to establish the operating mechanism itself, then with increased laser cannon power, it will be able to shoot down targets. And not just drones by any means.
In terms of their basic principle, these devices will be primarily utilized in the beginning to detect and intercept those same drones. Possibly in the future we can talk about using it against missiles and also about using it against glide bombs, but that will take time.
For now, the main focus is on making the Trident as maneuverable as possible in its current version. This will allow it to be quickly redeployed to difficult areas, which is the ideal solution for covering military positions.
And now Moldova has finally joined the camp of Russia's enemies. First of all, they have legally restricted the use of the Russian language there. And Transnistria is on the path to liberation from the Kremlin occupiers. In the near future, Moldova may join the European Union. We'll tell and show you right now how the hashtag failure Putin has gained yet another adversary.
Moldova is moving even further away from Russia, now even on the language issue. The day before, the country's parliament restricted the use of the Russian language, which immediately drew a reaction from pro-Russian politicians.
Mr. Radomirian, please take your seat. Please take your seat.
Mr. Radomirian, please take your seat. Order, please. Please, Ms. Makari.
The new rules have now set time limits for speeches and declared Romanian as the only working language in parliament. Previously, Russian was classified as the language of interethnic communication, and documents were regularly translated into it, which often became a pretext for speculation and disruption of deputies' work, as happened at the last session.
There certainly are a number of clear indicators that show the Russian state-controlled information apparatus is now gradually pivoting its primary strategic focus to more complex social and domestic issues.
At the same time, understanding the enormous pressure of Russian propaganda, Moldova is doing its best to distance itself safely from the Russian Federation. By the way, the recent statement about the country's withdrawal from the CIS is clear confirmation of this. The Commonwealth itself, created as a union of equals from the very beginning, became an association of almost powerless satellites of Moscow. And it was impossible to endure this endlessly.
For Russia, the CS was nothing more than a tool to keep the former Soviet republics within its sphere of influence. Agreements with the CIS, as well as trade with Russia and migration agreements, were nothing but a club that Russia used against its disobedient former colonies.
The European Union today is the complete opposite. That is exactly where Moldova set its sights, which was supported by the majority of the population in a referendum and by re-electing a pro-European president.
We know what disinformation, energy sabotage, economic pressure, and election interference look like. We share this experience with other countries facing similar tactics. That is why Moldova's accession to the European Union will be an act of strategic alignment for the entire Union. After all, we are a stable democracy on the eastern border, with direct experience in hybrid warfare, implementing real reforms, and possessing the political will to become a reliable partner.
One of the last arguments of Moscow's supporters is cheap energy resources for its allies. That was their argument. It was voiced both when the country left the CIS and with every new anti-Russian decision by the authorities. However, both then and now, this remains nothing more than typical Kremlin propaganda.
The energy argument is one of the Russian proxy's favorites. They claim that membership in the CIS gives us access to cheap energy resources, which is actually a lie. And this argument falls apart in 2 seconds. By the fact that throughout its entire membership in the CIS, the Republic of Moldova never gained access to natural resources or natural gas from Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, and Kazakhstan, which are much cheaper than Russian gas.
The language issue is probably the Kremlin's second favorite topic. It was precisely under the pretense of protecting the Russian-speaking population that they launched the war against Ukraine. Today, these arguments are also being voiced in the Moldovan parliament. For example, a certain Alexander Vershinin from the right-wing party Democracy at Home stated that democracy is deteriorating because of such restrictions.
The ongoing campaigns of disinformation and the strategic operations currently being carried out against Moldova are part of a much broader and more complex hybrid theater of conflict and represent a significant part of the war that Russia is actively waging and conducting against Ukraine.
Some other members of parliament are calling for neutrality. They say, let's not quarrel with either Moscow or Brussels. However, again, based on Ukraine's experience, it can be said with confidence that this position is doomed to fail.
For decades, all the pro-Russian forces in Moldova have been telling us, why not? Let's be friends with both sides. Let's be a bridge between East and West. Let's live on the bridge. It's so wonderful. And now their leader, the spiritual leader of Russia, that's Putin, has said that no, it's impossible. It's either one way or the other.
Moldova chose that path and received incredible support from Europeans. As the head of European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas proposed doubling EU funding for Moldova's defense as well as fast-tracking the country's accession to the European Union. Her position is supported by almost all members of the alliance.
Moldova did this to align itself with the European Union's common foreign and security policy, which is undoubtedly a very good step and the right choice for the Moldovan people because Russia cannot be relied upon. That is why we will continue to support Moldova in all its efforts on the path to Europe.
One aspect of this path is Transnistria. At the state level, a decision has already been made to return the republic to the country. As a temporary solution, external administration of the region by the European Union is being proposed. And when people in Tiraspol can clearly see the difference between the European approach and, as it is today, the Russian one, the question of who offers a better life will resolve itself.
That's all for today, but very soon on the Front News program, there will be new, unique reports from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, obtained so that you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.